Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our lesson on writing a great literature review. Today, what I want to do is I want to go over a short excerpt of a literature review, and we're going to talk about some common themes that we see emerge. And we're also going to talk about how the researchers identify the gap in the literature. And then I want to talk a little bit about the difference between a literature review for our dissertation and a literature review that you'll see when you write a research article. So let's take a look at this excerpt here. And this is a very short excerpt, and this is meant to demonstrate some of the things that you're going to see and you're going to write when you produce your own literature review. So let's go ahead and go through this together. Although doctoral students are generally expected to demonstrate advanced academic writing skills, multilingual students often encounter additional challenges related to language proficiency, disciplinary conventions, and access to writing support. A study by Kim and Thompson, I'm going to highlight that right there. Go. Found that multilingual doctoral students frequently reported limited opportunities to receive discipline-specific writing feedback, particularly in STEM fields. Many expressed frustration with generic writing workshops that did not address the rhetorical structures or epistemological assumptions of their field. Similarly, Alemu, 2020, observed that while institutional writing centers existed in most Ethiopian universities, they were rarely tailored to the needs of graduate students or multilingual writers. His interviews revealed that students often relied on informal peer networks, which varied widely in effectiveness. Interestingly, both studies, okay, so I've got something to indicate there's some common ground there, highlight a disconnect between formal support services and the actual writing needs of this population. So I'm going to highlight that. Well, Kim and Thompson focused on North American institutions using a survey interview design. Alemu employed qualitative interviews in an Ethiopian context. So right there, I've got some difference in terms of how they approached the study in terms of methods. Together, the findings suggest that multilingual doctoral students remain underserved in both global North and South institutions. However, further research is needed to understand how institutional design, faculty engagement, and peer dynamics influence writing development across contexts. So let's go ahead and take a look at these questions here. First of all, who are our researchers? Well, we've got Kim and Thompson, and we've got Alemu. And what did they find? Well, we've got the findings from Kim and Thompson listed up here. I'm going to highlight that there were limited opportunities to receive discipline-specific writing feedback, and they focused on STEM fields. Students expressed frustration with what they felt were generic writing workshops. They were not focused on the needs of multilingual doctoral students. And Alemu observed that institutional writing centers existed in most Ethiopian universities. However, they were rarely tailored to the needs of graduate students or multilingual writers. So that's a very similar finding to what we have from Kim and Thompson. Here we can see he used interviews, and we have that mentioned down here as well, qualitative interviews. So we've got a difference in terms of the methods. What were the common themes? Well, these students are not having their needs met. They're underserved. So that's a common theme. And we can see that the author funneled down to arrive at the gap in the literature where further research is needed. Further research is needed to understand how institutional design, faculty engagement, and peer dynamics influence writing development across contexts. So they've created a research space there. Now they're going to need to fill that space with their own study. So hopefully Their study is going to address those needs that they just highlighted, that gap in the literature that they just highlighted. So let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about how literature reviews can differ depending on whether we're writing our dissertation or we're writing our journal article. So take a moment and reflect on how you might think they're different. Now, I know there's the first obvious difference, which is the literature review for our dissertation is going to be far longer and far more in depth than what we're going to see for a journal article. But there are differences beyond that. So when we take a look at this table here, we can see that when we're writing our dissertation, we want to demonstrate familiarity with the entire field. Where a journal article, remember, you're writing within the constraints of whatever constraints are imposed upon you by that journal. So you might only have a few paragraphs to establish the relevant literature. So you're just talking about the literature that's relevant to the study that you're doing. When you're writing your dissertation, you're really looking to show a very wide or an in-depth gap. I shouldn't necessarily say a wide gap, but you're looking to show depth. Whereas in a journal article, you're simply positioning your study. You're highlighting the relevance of your study. And you're just justifying your research. Whereas in a dissertation, you're going to take the title of doctor. So you need to prove that you understand the theories relative to this particular area, debates surrounding it, and also different research methods, because you're going to, of course, be examining these different studies and probably many of which employ different approaches. And you're going to need to talk about how those different research methods resulted in the different findings. And that's important because essentially, after you become a doctor, you're going to be advising other doctoral students. So let's take a look at some other differences here. The first obvious one is the length. Okay, you're going to be writing a literature review for your dissertation that could be anywhere from 20 to 50 pages or more, whereas your journal article is just going to be a few short paragraphs. You're going to make an effort to exhaust the literature in your dissertation. I remember going to my advisor and saying, is this something that is relevant? Should I be including this? And he said, you need to exhaust the literature. Whereas in your journal article, you don't have the space to do that. So you're going to need to be much more selective. This is something I think is really important when we talk about the voice in our journal article. We're really being more argumentative when we're writing a journal article. Whereas when we're writing our dissertation, we're really writing to display our knowledge. Remember, we talked about the difference between writing to inform, writing to persuade, and also writing to display. That was something we talked about in one of our early academic writing and research classes. We said generally when we're writing our dissertation, we're writing for our committee, right? They're the ones who are going to decide whether or not we're going to be passed. And their knowledge of the topic is much more extensive than ours. They're experts in the field. So we're writing to display what we know. And we want to, in our dissertation, we want to review the topic broadly, and we're looking to synthesize information from many different sources, which we're doing in our journal article, but we don't have the space to do it over the length and with the depth that we do in our dissertation. We have to be much more concise. So let's take a look here at two brief examples, okay? And of course, I can't go through an entire literature review in one slide, but I'm going to let you pause the video and read through each of these. Now, as we come back and we look at each of these, of course, we've got on our left is our dissertation, and I can see here that it says this dissertation contributes to the underexplored area. And here we've got our journal article on the right. The article contributes to current debates. So As we go through and we look at these two studies here, um, first of all, we're talking about all these different studies here. We're talking about a broad context, the past 2 decades. There's been attention paid to the challenges of students. We're talking about broadly about all these studies that have been done here. And then we funnel into recent research. Okay, and we're quite broad here. We're talking about writing centers and peer mentoring, and here we're establishing our gap. These studies provide a broad understanding of the landscape. They rarely consider the influence of cultural identity and linguistic agency. So we've got a different theoretical approach there. Okay, we're contributing to an underexplored area. And we see the author mention that here, how Ethiopian students construct voice and authority in their writing. So we're much more concise here. So here the author says multilingual doctoral students face a range of academic challenges, yet most studies center on Western institutional contexts. So we can see here that they're establishing the territory for the study, and they're also creating a gap really in one sentence. So they're being very concise in their writing. Here, where the author says recent research has explored institutional support structures such as writing centers and peer mentoring. Here, the author says, while writing support programs like workshop and peer review have proven helpful, few studies examine how these students develop authorial voice in under-resourced non-Western settings. So we can see several different ideas here that are argued and presented at length in our dissertation, are presented in one short sentence in our research article. This article responds to that gap. Okay, so the author is immediately filling that gap by analyzing self-reported writing strategies of multilingual doctoral students in Ethiopian universities, by highlighting students' own perceptions of voice and audience awareness. The article contributes to current debates, and that's something else. You know, with research articles, we want to talk about current relevance. That's so important. About global academic writing norms and equity in publishing. So we're positioning that relative to current social needs. So I want you to think about your own research topic and think about how you might present your ideas differently for your literature review and differently for your journal article. Now, I know writing a dissertation literature review is going to be very extensive, so you might choose to just outline this, perhaps establish your funnel, and then think about how you could communicate the important or the relevant research in a very brief journal article or a very brief literature review for a journal article. So that should help you to see the contrast between how you present these for these two different genres of writing. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's brief lesson, and I'll see you in our next video.